joining us on this Sunday afternoon. In the audience, we have undergraduate, postgraduate students, and scholars from various institutions of India. As you know, Let's Talk Tattva is a philosophy discussion forum. We organize discussions and talks by scholars of philosophy and informal discussions by students or student scholars on philosophy and everything. Through everything that externalizes life from books to music, arts, cinema, anything. Dr. CBK George is a professor of philosophy at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Using the phenomenological and post-structuralist approaches of contemporary philosophy, he has written on education, development, political ethics, pain and dying, and self and the other. His publications include Heidegger and the Development in the Global South, Springer 2015, and the co-edited volume Cultural Ontology of the Self in Pain, Springer 2016, and Teaching in Unequal Societies, Bloomsbury 2020. Today's talk by Professor Sibi is third session in our series called Philosophy with Scholars. Earlier we had Professor Satyan Sharma and then Dr. C.D. Sebastian from IIT Bombay itself. So today's topic will be prejudice and pedagogue teaching in a democratic classroom. So here it's over to Professor Sibi to lead us on this discussion and interesting journey of ideas. Thank you for joining us. It's over to you, sir. Thank you.
So good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining. I especially thank Himanshu and all of you at the Let's Talk Tattva group for inviting me for this interaction. I guess you have already gone through the piece that I'm going to give an exposition of today. I will still replay with you the argument, recapitulate the argument very briefly, and then we can have a discussion. So, to introduce the argument of this chapter, this actually chapter of a book, this book was published in 2020. Professor Krishna Kumar of Education has written a foreword. It's actually a collected volume of essays, which is the product of a conference organized in 2018, December. The argument of this paper goes like this. This chapter goes like this. Formal education has, let's say, two mediatory social roles. It has many roles, but I'm positing before you two roles. One is eliminating inhibiting social roles, so inhibiting elements of one's birth circumstances on one's prospects in life. So these aspects have to be eliminated. That is one aim of formal education. The second aim, which is going to be the subject matter of this discussion, is the minimizing of the hold or sway of prejudices on individuals, on citizens. So the purpose of my presentation is to show how formal education spaces, formal education settings can question and challenge prejudices of both students and teachers. But usually when we think of challenging prejudices in a modern philosophical sense, we think that reason is the ultimate absolute basis for doing so. However, in this paper, our argument is going to be that we don't have any such fully transparent absolute basis, which is rational, fully rational. We don't have such basis. Still, how can we question prejudices is the question. One word about my approach. My approach is going to be very synthetic, which means I'll bring a lot of philosophies and philosophers into the discussion. This is not the best method. I will not recommend it for all of you who are beginning to write philosophy. But you know, the good philosopher is somebody who can carefully distinguish between the ideas of different philosophers. That I agree. But sometimes a good philosopher also sits back and looks at the different philosophical approaches, especially over time, and sees the connections between these different ideas. So my approach is going to be that. So it's and I'll show the connections. Okay, that's about method. One word about the context of the presentation. The context is not alternative education, not special education or special educational settings. The context is simply average Indian classroom, if you will, the average Indian rural classroom, because those are the most classrooms that we have. Okay, let me go into the first part of the argument, the first part of the paper. Prejudice, whether it is inescapable, ineluctable, unavoidable, or is it avoidable, or is it refusable, is the question. Why are we asking this question at all? I'm going to include a lot to engage with a lot of 20th century philosophical ideas and show that it's an important question. And of course, my answer will be that we can refuse prejudice, but I'll take a meandering journey to make that conclusion. So my reference is, most of you will know this, to the 20th century philosophical hermeneutics idea that prejudice is something indispensable. Gadamer is somebody who gave a positive, constructive nuance to the term prejudice. For him, prejudice means prejudgments. It is the inarticulate basis of all human historical understanding. So prejudice means the tradition, the worldview from where we come, the historical understanding which we share with others. So that's all prejudice. Without having that background, we cannot even understand anything, is the idea. There's no pure self-consciousness. That is ontologically impossible, is what Gadamer thinks. So it is actually a counter narrative to the high modern 19th century modern idea, especially in Kant, but also in Descartes and others, but especially in Kant. We have this idea, especially in his 1784 essay, What is Enlightenment? There he says, the enlightened person is supposedly the mature human, the grown, fully grown human being, who has an enlightened consciousness. And this person can use his or her reason, transparent, absolute reason, universal reason, without the guidance of any church, any Bible, any political power, any authority. He can use it on his own, is the idea. Gadamer says this modern prejudice against prejudice should be put aside. So I will cite one quotation from Gadamer's famous book, Truth and Method, 1960. So there he says, the self-awareness of the individual is only a flickering in the closed circuit of historical understanding, historical life. That is why the prejudices of the individual, far more than his or her judgments, constitute the historical reality of his being. Hence, the teacher, Gadamer's teacher, must be already prejudiced before he can teach, she can teach. That's interesting. You have to be having certain prejudgments before you can teach anything to others. The question that we want to pose to Gadamer is, but can certain very substantial aspects of the teacher's prejudices, can they be transformed? Can the teacher transform certain substantial aspects of the student's prejudices? Because the worldview of the teacher and the student are more or less the same. Are is the teacher capable of transforming certain not so good aspects of the historical understanding of the student so that the student can grow up into a mature human being? That's the question we have for Gadamer. In fact, Gadamer, when he was criticized on this point, he wrote later in a preface to a later edition of Truth and Method. He justifies himself by saying, I'm not speaking about what we do or what we ought to do, but what happens to us over and above our wanting and doing. He's emphasizing that he is speaking about the ontology of the human being, not about ethics or what they should do, what they must do, what politics they should have. None of those. What human beings are, ordinarily speaking. So, according to Gadamer, your hermeneutical situation cannot become completely a part of your reflection, and you cannot completely overcome your historical situation. Part of it you might be able to overcome, but part of it inevitably you have to carry with you to your grave, is this idea. This is where Habermas has his critique. As you know, Habermas belongs to not to the hermeneutical or phenomenological school, but to the critical theory school, Frankfurt School, neo-Marxism, and all that. So his criticism is that Gadamer's teacher can only legitimate or legitimize the prejudice of the students. The supposedly good or supposedly positive sense of prejudice or historical understanding of the student, and can only make the student reflectively accept his or her historical understanding, not to transform them, not to abandon them. Even if they are not right, the student cannot fully abandon them. That Gadamer's teacher cannot do, is what Habermas says. So, Gadamer's teacher makes the involuntary, the inarticulate, voluntarily and articulately acceptable for the student. So, what is being talked about? What is being talked about is simple. History, historical understanding, all these are the things that are taught in our books, especially in the humanities. So this is typically what Gadamer's type of teacher does, is what Habermas is saying. And according to Habermas, this is not enough to challenge our problematic aspect of our historical understanding, what he calls systematically distorted communication. These are self-deceptions that we carry across generations to posterity. These must be questioned and changed, and Gadamer's teacher is incapable of doing that, is the challenge that Habermas poses to Gadamer. But what is the problem of Habermas? The problem of Habermas, as I see it, is that he idealizes the rational consensus idea and the ideal speech situations. It's as though human beings can come in an ideal platform and speak and settle and resolve their issues and get convinced and persuaded. This, I think, is too innocent an idea, too naive. This cannot happen often. In fact, so that much about Habermas. Now, Derrida also engages with Gadamer's ideas, and Derrida's. I'm going to take Derrida's ideas forward, and there I will have also the critique of Habermas becoming clear. According to Derrida, in a dialogical situation, Gadamer and Habermas and people like that, he's speaking specifically about Gadamer, assume that there is a perfect understanding of each other in that kind of dialogical situation. And Derrida says, no, I do not think that a perfect understanding is ever possible, as Professor Gadamer speaks about. It was directly to Gadamer that he said this. And Gadamer has this idea, wonderful idea actually, that we have our historical understanding, and when we meet others, they have their historical understanding if it is different from us, and we discuss and share, and a part of it we carry, part of our historical understanding we carry, and part of the others' historical understanding, and we share, and this gets fused, and there is a fusion of horizon when we meet people from other cultures and horizons. Beautiful idea. But Derrida says there is no law and there is no rule guiding this kind of fusion of traditional and new horizons. It might happen. If it happens, well and good. But there is no natural law governing it. You have to make an effort. Gadamer thinks that this is ontologically happening. He says no. Habermas also says no. If you're condemned to prejudice, if we are condemned to prejudice, as Gadamer thinks, no judgment, no decision is ever possible. Everything that we say and do, and we think that we have knowledge, but we have is only a technical application of our coherence frame of prejudice, prejudgments, in order to understand anything. We can't understand anything anew from another perspective, because the only perspective with which we can understand is something like a mathematical formula that we carry. So this is too technical and technological an understanding for Derrida. So what do we learn from this discussion? Prejudice can be refused, but there is no ideal speech situation or fully transparent reason to back us for refusing prejudice. Prejudices have to be put to question continuously in our everyday situations. And prejudices are really challenged not by us, but by others. Who are these others? Especially the cynics, the skeptics, the dissenters, the rebels. So these are the people who will put our prejudices to question. So now I'm bringing another idea from Foucault. Both prejudice and its refusal are conditioned on power, not on reason, not on absolute reason, on power, Foucault says. And what is power? Power is a relation of force. It may be coercive and repressive and restrictive, but not always. It can be also seductive, productive, constructive. That doesn't mean all constructive power is good, moral, etc. Constructive means it produces something. It is a situation which is made acceptable for most people. So power is one type of different types of relations of force, social force, which come together. Power always means a way of escaping the power that we share, of the power that we assume. It already means a resistance. So the questioner, the one who asks a question to your prejudice, and the questioned, you, both of us emerge within certain groundless, discursive, material network of power and knowledge. Why power and knowledge? These relations of force create certain rational knowledge, supposedly rational knowledge, because that is acceptable as rational by most people. But they can be changed. There is no absolute foundation for this. It is a new scheme of power when there is a new knowledge arising. At the same time, the questioner and the questioned are already tied to others, as Derrida says. And according to Derrida, in an originary friendship. Now, what is meant by this? An originary friendship. Simply this. See, as babies, when we begin to be selves, what happens is we receive passively our world in language, in symbolism, in material practices, etc. We receive the world of meaning. And this happens not by resistance, but by passive acceptance very often. And that's why this sharing of meaning is called an originary friendship. And this happens not from within the self, but from the other person. So the other is an important constituent to our self-understanding. And if you carry this logic forward, when the question of our prejudice is really coming from the other, who is most distant from our self-understanding, then the challenge to our prejudice is most valid. And then if we are able to reflect and have a different understanding or can encounter our prejudice, that's the best possible situation for Derrida. Now, I believe, and I carry this idea forward, and I believe modern education settings, the formal settings, can aim to overcome prejudice or help. In modern education settings, teachers can aim to help students overcome prejudices in these ways that I have formulated so far. Second section, disciplining the heathens, education in colonial clothing. Now I will deal with a series of difficulties in fighting prejudice. And my reference point is the beginning of modern education in India. That'll be interesting. And I'll come more to the teacher's role in fighting prejudice in the third section. Now I am emphasizing the difficulty because we don't have a fully transparent ground and reason. Portuguese missionaries set up the first symbols of modern education in India. They set up the first school in 15th century, modern school, not the Gurukul system, in the 15th century, and the printing press they set up in the 16th century, the first one. But the missionaries saw education as a civilizing mission of evangelizing the heathen subjects of the Raj, the European Raj during the Portuguese times, and later the missionaries continued, the later British Raj. So here already we find that the fight against prejudice, which is supposedly an idea of modern education, is already corrupt because there is already a prejudice among the people who set up modern education in India. So there is already an impure position from where we start. The ideals of modern education, one of which that we are foregrounding in this presentation, is refusal of prejudice. So these ideals can survive only in these, together with these impurities, together with these grounds of power and challenge of these power. That's the only way for new ideas and rejection of prejudice to happen. Modern education, ME is modern education, changed Indian attitudes. Of course it did. But that change, the change that it brought was not necessarily to negate certain supposedly unethical and unjustified practices of Indian practices like caste or gender prejudices. They did not, especially initially. For example, Dipesh Chakrabarty says, women's education initially was talked about as something more, women's education in the modern sense is talked about as a kind of thing that is going to lead to domestic happiness, not something that is going to lead to employment or life outside the household. That's initially the case. That was initially the case. So, together with these corruptions, however, survived also the modern education, the modern idea of check on prejudice and using education as a check on prejudice. I'll give you the example of Nehru, Gandhi, and Ambedkar, three pillars of modern India. Nehru, in the discovery of India, he thinks that the imperfect beginnings of modern education in India actually gave us rebels, dissenters, rebels against the Raj. But they also gave rebels against our own culture, like anti caste activists. Of course, it gave us anti colonial protesters. Modern education developed in India a sense of, in his own words, revolt against some customs and aspects of Indian life. So that is the revolt against Indian prejudices. And a growing demand for political freedom. That is the revolt against British prejudices. Now, that's Nehru. So more on this you can read in the article. So Gandhi was more ambivalent, as he always is. He saw modern education as corrupting, sensual, materialistic, unethical, consumerist, all that. Because, as in the Hindu Swaraj 1909, he has a strong critique of modern civilization. Once when Gandhi landed in London, people asked him, "What is your idea of opinion on modern civilization?" He said, "Civilization? Oh, that's a good idea," which means to say that there is no civilization. It's merely an idea. There's no modern civilization. So that's Gandhi. So he argued, therefore, that modern education should not be made compulsory. Traditional Gurukul system of education is good, according to Gandhi, for character building. But Gandhi was a very complicated, complex figure. In some other writings, he says different things at different places. In some other writings, he advocates liberal education for women, and he condescendingly advises husbands who are liberally educated to give their education to their wives. And when he was in South Africa, he had an experiment of some kind of a Gurukul system of school. It is called Tolstoy's Farm. But in that school, he had all mixtures of castes and all mixture of religions in that experimental school. So is that a modern idea? Surely it is. So he wanted to mix the traditional and the modern in these ways. That's Gandhi. Ambedkar. Ambedkar is a quintessential modernist. But he took modern systems took to task modern systems for not living up to the modern ideal of, check on prejudice. He criticized the British policy of making education only a preserve of the higher classes, which means higher castes. So when he was going through the documents of the government documents, he found that there was a committee which advocated committee to look into the complaints of the Muslim minority. And this committee advocated education for Muslim minority, but not for the erstwhile untouchable castes. He criticized the missionaries also. According to him, the missionary schools are open to all. But still, he criticizes them, saying that caste governs the life of Christians as much as it does the life of the Hindus. And that is the case even today. Malayali Christians and Goan Christians and all, caste is strong, just like as in mainstream Hindu life. He writes that education is necessary for unmasking the lie where injustice, abuse, oppression are all grounded, all based. So before we attack oppression, before we fight against oppression, we must understand what is the basis of oppression, what are the prejudices to be attacked. For that, education is very important according to him. So Ambedkar is an important thinker when we consider how to fight against prejudice. What do we learn from all these discussions up to now in this section? There is always, according to me, this my term, a translational slippage between what is ideal, and what is and what should be, what actually happens and what is the ideal. Modern education is modern very often only in name. There is a 2013-14 report that I have referred to in the paper called India Exclusion Report, compiled by the Equality Organization, I think headed by Harsh Mandar and others. It recognizes 5 groups of children who are excluded typically in our schools, especially in rural areas: girls, Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims, and disabled children. They face discriminatory behavior from other students and from teachers. They're teased, they're stereotyped. Muslims as violent, Dalits as, lazy and based on and looking for privileges from reservation, and so on and so forth it goes. What's the use of a girl coming to school, etc., etc. So sites of modern education in India very often systematically reinforce and fortify inherited prejudices. This must be underlined. Instead, ideally, the teacher should refuse prejudices or argument. Now lastly, I am going to look at a very cliched story. It is a part real and part fictional story. It's a story of student prejudice and teacher refusal of prejudice. So my third section, Shraddha's World, the classroom as a democratic space. Before coming to Shraddha's story, let me give you a little bit of more gyan about Foucault. Foucault, in their book Discipline and Punish, this is a book of Foucault that I have read very, very closely. Here, he speaks about disciplining as something that produces subjects in a positive sense. Positive means it has an outcome, really, rather than negating. Many Foucauldians, going from this argument, they argue that educational spaces in the 19th century in Europe, these spaces constructed discrete individuals. Before this period, there were no individuals, no discrete modern individuals who have a sense of their dignity and right and all. It's a typical modern idea. How did education system create these subjects, citizens? Through, for example, examination. Foucault has a wonderful chapter on examination. How? See, before school, children are all more or less the same. They share the same social background. Some are rich, some are poor, but they have the same worldview. But examination will point out who is more intelligent and who is not. So discriminate between them. And modern education totalizes state power. It gives enormous power to the state. So education, in considered from this point of view, from the point of view of disciplining the citizen, making the modern citizen from the point of view of the state, modern education is a mediating disciplinary tactic between power and knowledge. Power and knowledge go together. And what makes their coming together possible? Modern education, according to these Foucauldians who are educationists. So the ideal of refusal of prejudice is possible only always within an ensemble of power knowledge, within a scheme of power, a regime of power. And this regime of power is always bounded by knowledge and education, created by education. How true? How true? It can mean also the other thing, critique of prejudice and refusal of it. However, we have not only formal education, we have also informal education settings. Informal education settings are families and community and all that, church, temple, religion, and all that, mosque. So the informal educational setting of the family and the community may have so much power that it may disallow any change in the formal setting. So students may come to school, teacher may give them a moral gyan lecture, but students may just receive it and don't act on it. They believe more in what they have imbibed. They don't change it. So subjects, students who come to school, they may disguise and conceal their prejudices. They may act in some ways palatable, but they go with their prejudices more than change them. Ambedkar and Dewey, both of them are philosophers of education and democracy. And Ambedkar was a student of Dewey, so he is very much Deweyan. So Ambedkar argues that the democratic ideal in the annihilation of caste, he argues that the democratic ideal is against isolation, exclusion, and privileging of some as opposed to others. He uses the biological term endosmosis. So there has to be easy passage as fluid passes through a plant's body. So there has to be easy passage and intermingling of citizens in a democratic space or country. That is the idea of Dewey and Ambedkar. Derrida has a more radical idea, more critical idea. He says democracy is actually about embracing difference, embracing the other without hierarchizing differences. All of us are different. The problem and complete equalization of difference is not possible. We can only accept difference and don't count difference. We can refuse to count difference in our ethical dealings. Otherwise, differences are real. We can stop hierarchizing them as big and small, rich and poor, and so on, privileged and unprivileged. Democracy, actually, according to Derrida, involves a paradox. What is this paradox? On the one hand, democracy means equality and equal respect for all, irrespective of national boundary or anything. But in practice, democracy is limiting and bounded, and it means the respect rationed out to the nationals and within the nation to some, etc. So that's a paradox that democracy always has, because it goes by voting and other strategies. So overcoming this paradox, we cannot often politically overcome it. We can only ethically overcome it. Overcoming this paradox, how can we do that? We can do that through friendship and respect for all, especially the stranger or the other who is most distant from the self. According to Derrida and the Derridians, some commentator I am citing here, this respect for other involves ultimately the decision to defend the other even against the law. Law is not against the prejudices often. Law very often takes our culture's prejudgments and prejudices into consideration. Only that which is most abominable is often set aside, sometimes not even that. So law is not completely ethical, need not be. This is the positivist theory of law. Whereas ethics has to take into consideration such considerations. So ethics, our ethical treatment of others, involves subversion of prejudice. Now Shraddha's story. This story is very simple. This is a cliched story, partly real because I hear this every day, and partly fictional because it's not about one particular individual. This story says that there is this girl in a Mumbai classroom. She's a South Indian Brahmin girl from a South Indian Brahmin family. Her mother is a banker and a sportswoman. She likes sports. Her mother plays games, and her father is a scientist. So this girl is brought up as good in everything. She's good at study, she's good at sport, she's good at dancing, singing, and all that. So she's a star and topper in the school. But she irritates everyone. Why she irritates her friends and some teachers? Because she has very peculiar habits. She doesn't join with others very often. When the students sit together during lunch and share their food cooked in different families, she doesn't take part. She can only give food, she cannot take it. She has only once taken some upma from one friend, but students, it did not miss on the other students that this girl from whom she shared food is from her own community. So there is a teacher called Mitali. This teacher is very democratic in her attitude. She's a mathematics teacher. And she says number one is number one only in relation to number two, number three, and number four. If these other numbers are not there, there is no number one. It has no special meaning. Similarly, according to her, you are valuable. You are a person. You are something only in relation to others. I'm actually putting into the mouth of this teacher the ideas of Jean-Luc Nancy and several of these philosophers, only in relation to others. So, this teacher wants these ideas to percolate, and she wants to indirectly at least influence her students. And she notices that this girl is very difficult to handle because she comes with certain power. She's good at everything. She's otherwise very sincere, respectful of teachers, and so on. But for example, there is a drama in the school, and she has to be a part of this drama because she's so talented. But she will not share the clothes borrowed from outside because you can, for example, in big cities, you can hire costumes. She will not hire because that is worn by others. Teacher insists that she should. So this girl goes and complains, and her parents come to the principal and complain. And the principal calls Mitali, the teacher, and reprimands her because the parents say the teacher should not interfere with the ethical attitudes and habits of students. Do you have a counter argument to that? Very often not. So the principal reprimanded, and the parents went away victoriously, and the teacher remained on in the room. But Mithali did not give up. She asked the principal, is there any rule in our school's rule book for teachers which says that the teacher cannot counter the prejudices of her students? The principal understood that this is going to be a very explosive situation. He did not answer, but she went back and she continued to persuade the students and continued to practice. Shraddha may not listen, may not go into change, she may not change her attitudes and behavior, but Mithali continued. So my argument is basically that in that kind of situation, where a powerful ethic is in display, we cannot often resist it. Even our failure and performance of our failure is good enough. So the failure of Mithali is an instance of teaching in a democratic classroom. So I will now read this quotation. This is from my paper. Caste habits come to her. It's not come to Shraddha. Effort. We cannot blame Shraddha. Why? Because caste habits come to her effortlessly because she is part of a powerful network of religious, social, material forces that have gently, persuasively, pleasingly, and sometimes punitively enforced them since the time she was a baby. receiving the world around her in curious gay abandon, more passively than not. The sway, regularity, and solemnity of rule enforcement, and the embodied material aspects of the cultivation of habits in a prayerful and moralizing ambience were irresistible to her. Now, Mithali's failure is a lesson for all of us. Now, in the paper, I have discussed not in much detail different ways in which a teacher can typically counter prejudices in a classroom. I'll just go through this list. Non-identitarian approaches to students. Forget about what the students are, from where they come, what community they come from. You remember and think about the community and all that only if you want to practice positive discrimination. That is, special treatment of people in order to give them more power and in order to create more equality. That is, accepted in the Constitution, for example. Second, a moralizing approach is not good. Mithali is not a moralizing teacher, but she is actually actively making students do certain things and change their habits through doing. Denying prejudices in material arrangements of the classroom, in mixing students and so on. In making the ground rules very clear, what are the disapprovals and what are the incentives for student action. Making rule imposition quite unobtrusive, not burdensome. Being impartial to students. You become partial only if you want to practice positive discrimination. Fostering democratic relations among students. Ethical ways of conducting curricular activities, teaching. Ethical ways of conducting non-curricular activities like examinations, experiments, sports, games, the arts, and so on. For example, sometimes only some group of students sing in the assembly in a school. Every day the same. Why? Find out who all can sing. Why should it be only be some students? And so on. So, cultivation of a less dominating and less pejorative relation of power takes the teacher to do some of these things. She should not be pandering to prejudices which are circulating in society already. So, failure, even if it happens, it is a good failure and it's good to deploy it. So, deploying the denial of a less prejudicial relation of power as an instance of teaching. I'm going to read this much and stop. The last bit of my paper, refusal of the prejudicial ethic in the interest of the democratic space of the classroom, is often composed of little acts of disapproval and approval, dissent and assent, which gradually gather form, intelligibility, and social power, strong enough to challenge and neutralize an erstwhile powerful game of truth. We have only games of truth. We do not have absolute principles and absolute reason. Such is the nature of everyday revolution in general. So we don't have big Marxist revolutions and so on, but we have these small everyday revolutions which we can every day enact in what we do. The substantive and problematic prejudices of Shraddha's world are refusable, but it's difficult for her to do so because her world is a powerful and resilient network of entrapments that eases her existence and pleases her cultivated sensibilities. It seduces as well as enforces a morally solid, privileged structure of prejudgments within which caste, purity, vigilant moralism, and a sense of privileged separation from the common world are central parts. In the typical Indian classroom, Shraddha is impressive because she excels in the typical skills of knowledge and ethic demanded by the dominant scheme of power. The last slide. The persistence of such an ethic in a cytomodern education is a deviant translational slippage that refused to disappear, as we have seen since the colonial beginnings of that education, which is modern education in India. But Shraddha uses this uncorrected structure to her advantage, reinforces her impregnable ethic, and defends herself against pedagogical challenges posed by Mithali, who is eager to shape the classroom into a genuinely democratic space where all students belong without having to refer to the baggage of their socially imposed identities. So, the upshot of this analysis, however, is that Mithali's pedagogical failure is nonetheless a significant act of teaching, which she must continue in the interest of a search for new games of power and truth that will delegitimize the problematic aspects of Shraddha's world. After all, teaching in a democratic classroom is what the democratic teacher does and enables. Thank you. There are some questions in the chat box. Okay. Shall I go ahead? Yeah. See, in South Asia, religion is not going to go. We don't have the death of God. Religion is a phenomenon which is going to stay. Religion is there. So there's a lot of writings already on this. So most of you know this. So in South Asia, for example, most of our revolutionary ideas come through religion. For example, anti-caste movements in India came through Bhakti movement initially, and also in the Islamic Sufi tradition and so on. And traditional churches like the Catholic Church and all are today very aware of people's rights, poverty, and all kinds of things. Pope Francis, for example. So I will not say that let's do away with religious education, but what is important is religions themselves to be aware of how to transform them. Nothing remains forever the same. So religious education has also to transform itself. And this is really possible. This is really possible. And those possibilities have to be explored. And that is true whether it is of majority religion Hinduism in India, or minority religions like Christianity and Islam and other traditions. So religious teaching is very strong in the Abrahamic religions. For example, in Christianity, there is Sunday school where children go every Sunday and they are taught a typical syllabus as in a school. So these syllabuses can change, and important ideas and ethical ideas and, if you will, revolutionary ideas, these have to be inculcated into religious texts and textbooks and curriculum. Is it possible? I think it is possible. I think it is possible. It's really possible. In fact, that's the only possibility for change in South Asia. For example, in the place where I come from, Kerala, we call Kerala Navodhanam, which means, what is Navodhanam? Renaissance. Renaissance, the Kerala modernity and Renaissance begins with a religious event. That religious event is when a Hindu sannyasi who is from a lower caste, on one fine day, he took up a stone from a river and consecrated it and made it as a Shivaling for people to worship. This happened in 1888, and this is considered as the point of the beginning of Navodhanam in Kerala. So, it's now that a kind of religious politics is coming to India in a very strong way. These are things for everyone to reflect on and write about. Transformation and revolutionary ideas percolating through religious language and religious symbolism and religious narratives and religious theologies. This is possible. There is something called liberation theology. which came from South America, where there was strong Catholic Church, and they inserted Marxist ideas into Christian theology, Catholic theology. These are possible. What does this show? We don't have pure ideas. Our ideas are always impure and they get mixed, and newer possibilities come about. We should be blamed for not thinking about these possibilities and finding them out and bringing about new movements. That is up to us, today's generation. Does that satisfy Praveen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Next.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I don't have a question. I basically have some points to add, or I should say some concerns to express. I think that education can combat the prejudice that we are talking about only if the social, political, and economic goals of society are in congruence with what we are entrusting education with, that is combating prejudice. Because education and school system are not working in isolation. They're working in a society that has certain social institutions, certain political ideologies, certain economic structure, and all of these, especially in times like today, they are actively working to implant those prejudices that we are hoping the school to counter. And in such a scenario, how the school alone can counter and remedy the prejudices when such prejudices are so prevalent in spheres like social spheres, political spheres, and other domains of the society. And and when we are saying that teachers have a role in countering prejudice, the question that arises is when will from where will get these teachers, from where will these teachers come from? Because teachers themselves are coming from the same society, and they also have same set of internalized prejudices. They have internalized them in childhood only. And what happens in teachers training program is that when some teacher educator point out these prejudices to them during teacher training program, they find it very difficult to accept, because they also feel a sense of conflict between what they have already learned till now and what this teacher educator is telling them. And also, we can say that in a country like India, where nearly half of the schools do not have enough teachers, and there are lakhs and lakhs of schools that have only one or two teachers that are doing all kind of work, like from taking admission to making midday meals. How can such a teacher have the time for doing basic teaching, let alone like engaging in this kind of reflective teaching that we believe that can enable a student to counter and challenge their prejudices that they have hold so dearly right from their childhood. And even if we assume that we have such a kind of teacher who's really motivated about teaching children in this way that they can counter their prejudices, we must also see if that teacher will be given this opportunity. Because we have discussed about the authority of teacher in classroom, but what we really need to evaluate is that how much authority do teachers really have in the classroom. Because in colonial times, teachers were being trained for a comparatively weak profession, like they are only supposed to make their students civil and ready them for certain clerical jobs. And this pattern of teaching actually continues till now, because once they are established, they do not change so easily. So they have become the part of education culture now. So if teachers are given a curriculum that they are categorically told to teach children and also to indoctrinate them in a certain way, so in such a case, a teacher may not actually get the opportunity to make any kind of fresh intervention that she wishes to, because there is definitely a fear that what will happen if she will not be able to complete the syllabus, or the consequence that may follow if she will divert from the prescribed text. So if we say that teacher have a authority in classroom, or if I use Krish Kumar's word, that teacher is a kind of dictator of the classroom, we must also acknowledge that this dictator is a meek dictator. This dictator does not have a voice of her own. She's merely replicating what what social and political powers want her to teach to children. And if we are taking the aim of education to be this Ubuntu ideal that I am because we are, but teaching this I don't think would be that easy, uh, because this entire discourse of success and merit and division of resources and labor, they all are based on certain prejudices that 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 direct that that there are certain population that deserve something more than the other group of people, and this all is based on this kind of prejudices also. So I think we are talking in terms of exceptions and utopia, that but that has so many ifs and buts before it. And if and I think it would take centuries if these if and buts to get answer, and then finally we can realize this utopia. And then producing this kind of teacher in itself would be I think a utopia that we need to realize first before we can hope that this kind of teacher can counter certain kind of prejudices that are prevalent in the society.
Good, thank you. Yeah, so there is a vicious cycle. What is the vicious cycle? Whether we transform structure first or whether we transform the individual first. Anamika, what is your answer?
I don't think there is any clear answer to that.
There's no clear answer to that. Yes. So, in fact, there is no clear answer to that. The answer is that this should go concurrently. But when we think that structure is undergoing a negative change, prejudices are in all likelihood entering the classroom rather than the other way around, what do? We simply beat our breast and say that nothing can be done? I suppose no. Anamika and all of us would still like at least one teacher to be there who is going to do something. And there is no utopia. I said I actually, yes, I use the word ideal, but still we are actually teaching through prejudice. We are teaching through failure. Mithali's failure is the lesson, nothing more. So if anything, the paper is trying to argue, it's solely that I did not deal with structure because there is so much about structure already in the literature. There is so much about. So if we simply equate structure and the roles of persons, that also does not work. There are people who will sometimes play a role in transforming the structure, maybe a little, but still they might play a role. Now, can we have a discourse about them? Surely we can. If structures transform, and if we have a structure that will negate prejudices, especially in the classroom and, for example, through textbooks and other things, then it's good. Then it's an ideal situation. But very often that's not the case. Each government and each party has its own prejudices with which they come. Sometimes these are acceptable, sometimes these are so unacceptable. In all those situations, we cannot sit back and say that the teacher cannot. We do recognize the teacher's hopeless situation. That's a big literature on that, especially in India, and that's the case with South Asia as a whole. Now, but still, we can think about teachers. I have seen some teachers, I have seen really good teachers who, especially in my school days, who have tried a lot in their limited power to bring about change. I have seen teachers even in the more unlikely of places where they want to make a contribution to students' life. I have seen teachers even in our school, in Kendra Vidyalaya in the campus, who pay from their pocket for children who are poor. So we see these exceptional circumstances. We write about them. We for what? For encouraging this kind of thought among teachers. They are not a utopia. At the same time, they are not very real because they don't happen on a usual average basis. And there are reasons for these things not happening. And those reasons Anamika listed so well. Because the structure is already weak, because the school system and education system in the country is still colonial, because the teachers have no autonomy, because the teachers have no real power, they are poor dictators actually, etc., etc. Those are there. But still there are teachers who become exemplary models in this kind of situation. The paper is about them. We can write many papers. See, we cannot write everything at once. No, we can write papers about structural transformation. We can write papers about educational reforms. We can write papers about autonomy of the teacher, etc. And we can also write in this paper about these are the conditions to which, if they are fulfilled, only we can have this kind of a teacher like Vitali. No, I believe that even if the conditions are very poor, occasionally we have a teacher like Vitali. So the paper is about them. The paper is meaningful only because we have a hopeless situation. Otherwise, it has no special meaning. If everybody is doing well and we have teachers like in Scandinavian countries, their teachers are very good. Teachers are appointed also very carefully. If we have teachers like that, then we don't need a paper like this. No. Yeah. Okay. Anamika, you have more to add to that.
I think I agree with you that no matter how mega, there is hope, and I think there is at least some success in certain cases. One is where that I can think of is like gender biases and prejudices. There are some success we have achieved in those regards, but I think caste and religious prejudices are still a distant dream to counter those prejudices. But yeah, there is still hope. Definitely.
No, I have seen, these are all very personal, but I have seen teachers who specifically attack those, especially in my school days in 80s. So, we have occasionally this kind of teachers. 80s in Kerala means that was also the time when some of these ideas were discussed very vibrantly. Today, that may not be the case. All over India, it appears that we are going back on some of these ideas which were thoroughly discussed in the 80s. Is that good? Certainly, I suppose no. So even if we have big changes, political changes and all that, these ideas are still relevant and they can be talked about. And there can be teachers who will counter them. So the paper is about them. Okay, Himanshu, back to you.
Good evening, Professor. I actually concur with Anamika, and she has raised most of the points that I wanted to raise. However, a point that I would also like to bring to the fore is the importance of the curriculum in in uh, in perpetuating the prejudice. For example, if you read in my own reading of Nagugi, who wrote the Decolonizing the Mind, we see that the curriculum itself, because the scheme of education is very, very colonial in nature, the subject of education or the person who's receiving the education is already highly prejudiced when they are sitting in the classroom. That the sidelining of regional languages, the sidelining of regional knowledge. In that way, we see that the citizen that is being created is already a citizen through exclusion. It is not a citizen who is being created to fight prejudice, but a citizen that is created through prejudice. So this is one point that I find was missing in Anamika's critique of the lecture that you have presented. But I also agree at the same point that the site of intervention will always be capillary. That when we read Foucault, he clearly says that power is, you have to analyze power where it becomes capillary, not at the center, no, because there is no center, not in the structure, but where it is, where it becomes most palpable. So I see where on a theoretical level we are trying to go, but the structure and the individual cannot be isolated from each other, because for example, we have these concepts such as the hidden curriculum. We have these concepts such as the sidelining of these sort of regional narratives and identities, and all of these cannot actually. I feel that these things become highly relevant when we try to think about prejudice. So the I feel that there has been an overemphasis on pedagogy throughout the way this argument has been formulated by you.
Thank you. Rishabh, I can write, I mean, this is just an author's dilemma. I can write a paper completely on the critique of how the teacher is produced, how the teacher is producing his or her students. So that critique we can certainly have. I cannot certainly deny that that critique cannot be there. But isn't that critique a vibrant part of educational philosophy in India? I think so. A lot of writings on educational ideas in India is about structure, is about colonization of education, is about government interference, is about how the teachers are poorly paid and how the teachers are quite powerless in the classroom, and so on. So I did not really want to go back to those ideas. They are very important ideas. We cannot overlook, and thank you for raising them, because we should not go with an idea that we have a very powerful teacher who can do like Mithali did. Mithali is a special teacher only because teachers generally cannot do what she did. Most teachers cannot do what she did because they are part of the social system, they are poorly paid, they have no autonomy, principals can sack them at will. All this is there. That's why Mithali's kind of teaching is special. But for example, in situations like government schools, sometimes we can see this kind of teachers. In fact, Anamika herself wrote about one in the last paper she presented to me. She had written about a teacher like this, Anamika. So that teacher was like this, who
Yes,
had a
Farah
special,
Faruqi.
yeah, so had a special. So we are speaking, to make everything clear, we are speaking about exceptional teachers. We are speaking about exceptional and rare teachers. The usual teachers, but I will still think that, see, courage and boldness in our actions is not easy to come by. So as much courage as Faruqi or Mithali, the protagonist of my story, may not be there. But there are many teachers who are reflective from their very, each of us is acting from our limits. Each of us is acting from our limits. Who is so powerful as to change the world? No one. Who is, when are we going to have a situation where we are producing absolutely good, powerful citizens? We will not have. That doesn't mean structure should not change, but there are different, as Rishabh put it nicely, we are in a vicious cycle all the time. All hermeneutical schools of thought, they are telling us that there is no beginning point. There is no absolute beginning point. The point of beginning is a periphery from where we begin. And that is where resistance is, one of the places where resistance is possible. Shall we wait for absolute revolution to happen to change all this? I think that's not going. That's not an answer at all. We have curriculum change. We need to have curriculum changes. We need to have teacher transformation. We need to have structural transformations overall in society. Together with that, we can also have teachers like Mithali and Faruqi and others. They also make changes possible. In fact, most of us have good memories of one or two good teachers. Most of us do have. In India, with all these limitations, poorly paid teachers, teachers who are coming from traditional families, who have prejudices, but still we have good ideas of them. There are students who are good at sports. They may remember one teacher who paid for a shoe or something. There are teachers of this sort. So people who are acting from their very limited situations, we need to talk their story. We need to understand their story. We need to also philosophize their story. That's what I am trying to do. Okay. Because we do not have an absolute beginning point where structures will be transformed, teachers will be well taken care of, we're starting from Mithali. And we need to start from that kind of teacher. Okay. Yeah. Should I comment on that? No. See, but with Himanshu's comment, I think I should not be on the back foot about the argument, because when you said that, I remember I said that the informal situation, the informal, which means structure actually, family and society, community, these have greater power on the individual. That is recognized in the paper. That is why Mithali has failed in her. Failure has to be the performance that she has to do. That is why the principal is agreeing with the parents rather than countering them. That is why Miss Mithali is a sole teacher who is acting in these ways. So structure is not the power of the structure and the problem of the structure, and the idea that prejudices are more likely to be handed over to the child who comes to the classroom and the teacher who is going to teach than the other way around. That is recognized. If that is the case, and that's going to be the case, even if we have the best of the social structure, Then we have other kinds of, for example, the US, or let's say UK. There also, children come to the classroom with certain prejudices, though it is in many of the modern criteria, they are advanced society. Still, children come with certain prejudices against color, against South Asians in UK, and so on. So the teacher has to counter those, but the teacher is well paid, but the teacher may not counter. So what I'm trying to say is that even if the structural aspects of education, I have recognized in the paper that these are very strong. That's why failure. Now, even if that is the case, we need to look for teachers like Vitali, and we need to have their stories said. We need to think about that. So that's the point of the paper. Thank you. You mean, I suppose what she means is the competition in the school.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Good
So
evening. Yes,
yeah.
competition in the school through examination or through any other such activity. Competition is a reality, I mean, everywhere.
Competition is the reality. So this is what Foucault's chapter on examination beautifully writes about. But in the modern classroom, especially in our situation, if you do away with all competition, I do not know what we are going to have. We do recognize the ill effects of competition. See, for example, IIT entrance is the most competitive of tests, and everyone knows this. And of course, there are reservations and all that. But this test has also allowed rural Indians to enter this high, very elite institution. It has allowed Dalits and scheduled castes and tribes and others to enter. It has actually forbidden women to enter, girls to enter. So there have to be possibilities from that point of view, and several other points of view. So in all this, when we talk about all this, we have to recognize what is made possible and what is being denied. What is being denied and what is the problem with competition is, among children, for example, young children who are even not up to competition, there is a hierarchy created. Somebody is intelligent, somebody is not capable of grasping mathematics or something. All this kind of distinctions are created among students. So even before they can competition, they are into competition, and children undergo tremendous stress. Modern education is already a big stress for children. Before the schools began, the children did not have to get up at 8 o'clock or 6. Nowadays they're getting up at 5 o'clock and to catch 6 o'clock bus, and they travel in the bus 1 hour and reach their school at 8 o'clock for assembly, and all these things are happening. So this kind of a situation was not there before the modern period and the schools began. Children got up at their sweet time, they went around playing, they ate their food, and they had their life that way. So this is what Foucault means by disciplining, and why Foucault is such an important thinker when we think of modern education and education as such, and the rigors that it contributes. It produces certain discipline, the individuals and citizens, the good and bad it does. We need to attack competition, especially at younger age when students are not up to it. And that is recognized, that in our country also that is being recognized quite a bit. That's why grading is introduced, for example, rather than marks. That is why I think for up to class 4 or something, there shouldn't be a class 3 or something, there should be examination. At least that's what my child's time she had in the school. So some of these reforms, it's difficult to assess how. I'm not a scholar of education. It's difficult to assess how widespread they are, but these are being talked about, and those are the ways to encounter competition, especially competition to a child who is not up to it. But children who are in the high school and later, competition is a part of modern life. It can be reduced. Children who are all children not habituated to competition. They do well when they are not in the competition. They do well when they are taken out of the examination system. They can write a book if they are not writing an examination, but when they write an examination, their hands go frigid and they don't write. So these different kinds of children are there. So these have to be recognized and they have to be identified. That's why in Scandinavian countries, for example, there are these multiple approaches to education according to the need of the child. That is going to be happening in our countries. We cannot imagine, but these possibilities are there. I suppose this is what we can talk about when we talk about competition. But ideally that's ideal. That's the ideal. But Praveen, very often it does not happen, especially in a complex country like India. There are multiple interest groups and multiple ideologies, all these coming into play. So my paper is trying to be very humble. It is trying to start from assumptions that we are not saints, we have quarrels, we don't have exactly perfect rational ground, we do not even know what is a perfect transformation, but still small negotiations of regimes of power can happen in a classroom. That doesn't mean structural. Those are big ideas. Those are talked about. Those ideas have to be structural transformation, and the power regime there has to be tackled. So that discussion is there. But what about power regime within the classroom is what the question that we are asking. So from that point of view, what do you think is the idea that we're discussing? Okay. Brain drain. Ayush, how is it a prejudice? In what sense? Brain drain means people are, for example, moving to the US, they're not investing their talents here, is the complaint. The usual answer given is that there is not enough incentive, not enough employment and all that. So some people want to invest their talent elsewhere. I'm not somebody who thinks that that's a bad thing. But of course, these things have to be understood in their proportion. If there is a hugely disproportionate number who is running away from the country, that's a problem. Otherwise, it's not a big problem. Historically, it is there. It is going to be there, and it is going to be more in future. People moving from here. We are also inviting Americans and others to come and teach in our institutions. In IIT, some of them come and teach. So these things are happening all over the world. These make happen certain mixing of ideas, and certain height in education are introduced with this, etc. Are the arguments given. The second point is problems in regional areas. So regional areas, right? Those problems have to be tackled. But I'm sorry, I'm not the person for so practical questions. I can only give you general GAN, which you think. I also think,
Sir, even
like
in urban areas,
urban
this problem
areas.
is prevalent.
Yeah, you know, one problem in India is, I think one of you raised is, education theorists have been talking about it for a long time. That is language. We do not imbibe knowledge in our mother tongue. Whereas a small place like Korea, every Korean child learns in Korean language. So they read philosophy in German, but they philosophize in Korean. This is not happening in India. Is that good? Some people say it is good. But one big cause for inequality in education in India is language. It's a huge problem. Nobody is willing to tackle this. Nobody is willing to discuss. So this problem is irresolvable as of now, but it's a huge problem. At least we need to recognize that. And education theorists like Krishna Kumar and all have discussed a lot about this.
Even
What?
we face the same problem. As a non-English speaking guy, I face the same problem in articulating in English sometimes.
No, that's no, that's what we that's what we find in at the time of induction, how to choose people, because very often we are not choosing between people who don't know and people who know, but people who speak and people who do not speak a language. That's not good, but there is no other way. So we can, very often what we end up doing is to reject within English speaking students who are good and bad, and the other whole lot we cannot engage with them. So is it a good situation? Certainly not. How to overcome it? We have no answers.
No.
Anyway, yeah, that's why our children also do not learn basics like mathematics, arithmetic, and language, because they don't learn in their mother tongue. Anyway, more on this by education theorists. Okay, what's the next question? Are the questions over? Arif, yeah. Wait. Okay, Arif's question is, yes. Being aware of our own prejudice is the right place to start from. But people like Rishabh and Anamika and all will attack that approach, saying that that is very individualistic. That's not enough. Structures have to change. First, society have to change. But my point, Arif, is that we should not start from neither structure nor from the individual. We start from the middle. We look at a classroom where some teachers, they are part of the society, they are part of the structure, but somehow they find a way to deal with this. They are poorly paid. They have no administration which supports them, but still they. So we have some of these cases like that of Faruqi and this teacher Mitali. So let's start with some of these is big revolutions and reforms. Let them be there. Let them come. We are waiting for them. But where are they? They're not coming even after 70 years of discussions about them. We have first education report, Kothari Commission report, very early, but it's a huge report of many 1,000 pages or so. But nothing really has really transformed. China and all, they're investing in school much. Amartya Sen and all have emphasized this point so much. They're emphasizing school education. Then they can also emphasize higher education, but we are not doing this. But Arif, your idea that we should start, we at one level to start from is from our own personal level. As philosophers, as students and teachers, that is certainly a level from which we can start. Nobody can say no to that. That is certainly a level from which we can at least, I don't know whether that can be proposed as a model, but that is certainly a level from which we can start and we can talk about that. Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for presenting, surviving this long, and asking these very interesting and reflective questions, especially the questions on the criticisms of the framework that I used. Those are very important to me. And I want to congratulate this group, Himanshu and others who put this group together for vibrant discussions, making this into a vibrant discussion forum. Thank you so much. And I really encourage people to do this.